Hey, welcome to the Eagle Insight Podcast. And today's guest, Dave Haines. Hey, Dave is a retired Army officer who spent the last several years of his service as a battalion commander for Fort Knox Warrior Transition Unit from 2010 to 2012, where he led efforts to provide care and support for wounded, injured, and ill service members and their families. But before his retirement and after his retirement, Dave has been in the business of developing leaders both in and out of government, and he's helped U.S. and foreign militaries professionalize their forces. But more recently, he's been focused on the nonprofit sector and helping his community improve. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you made time for it because I know you're really busy. You've got a lot of things going on, and ever since I've known you, you've been a mountain biker. And I just remember thinking when, like, hey, mountain biking was a young man's game back when we were kids. And when I met you, you were already pretty senior in those roles, and you never let up. And you're still doing it, and I love that. But now you get to help other people in the mountain biking practice. So you're coaching kids. Tell me about that.
Yes. About 6 years ago, I just got with some people and we started this league in Kentucky, which is based on the National Interscholastic Cycling Association. It's a youth development organization that uses mountain biking to create lifelong athletes and leaders. And it was something that I heard about early in my military career and thought it was a great thing. And just for years, I wanted to do it. So around 2017, 2018, got involved with it, and it has really opened up an amazing world for me, as far as having 20, 30 years of military leadership. And this has taught me certainly a different aspect of leadership, being a coach and a leader to adolescents and the families that are involved in this program. So it's been pretty amazing for me.
That's awesome. I think, yeah, a lot of the leadership stuff that we learned in the military applies all over the place. And I'm very interested in how you're using what you learned in the military for developing leaders in the youth. I think that's fascinating. But there is one question I really have to ask, because you've been such an avid mountain biker that you actually got to ride with President George Bush, right?
Yes. So I was injured in Baghdad in 2006 and went through Walter Reed, was there for a few years, recovering and rehabilitating. And like you said, I've been an avid cyclist all my life. So it was one of my rehabilitation goals was to get back on a bike. And in that process of getting healthy again, I discovered this organization, Ride to Recovery, and I started going on rides with them. And then President Bush started his Warrior 100 ride in 2011, I believe it was. And because I was one of the sole mountain bikers in Ride to Recovery at the time, I was invited to go ride with President Bush in 2011. And fortunately, since that time, I've been invited back a number of times to ride with him and the other warriors and the great support people that helped President Bush pull this ride off. And it's just been an amazing journey. It's allowed me to meet all kinds of really great warriors that are amazing leaders and incredibly resilient, as well as the president, who, to get to see him away from the cameras and really have the opportunity to see him as just a human being and what a great person he is, has been an incredible opportunity. And also just in this process, I was asked to be part of the Portraits of Courage project that the president did a few years ago, and was fortunate enough to have my portrait painted by President Bush. And it's being displayed, I guess, all over the world by this point. I think the latest place it's been is down at the Epcot Center in Disney World. So kind of a neat side journey that was completely unexpected as a military leader.
Yeah, it's so amazing where you might end up in life if you just are willing to say yes to things and to get going and participate in things. But I think you hit on something there that is really important. It's that resilience thing. We talk about it in the military quite a bit about being resilient, but not everybody really is able to recover from what could have been a truly catastrophic injury to get back on a bike and to do it well enough that you're capable of participating in events such as that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very fortunate. I had some great surgeons when I was going through my recovery process, and I think part of it was a significant part of it was my friends and my family, right? And I can never be generous enough to my wife in the role she played, both her strength and her patience, as I went through that. And I think the cycling just gives me an outlet to exercise physically, but also to kind of balance myself out emotionally and psychologically. And it's also a community sport a lot of the times. And whether there's a veteran there or it's just a great group of people, to know you're part of a community um, that is just generally a great bunch of people. I think that provides a support system that is pretty amazing and has helped me with my resilience. Um, I had I got out of the military in 2012 and thought I was doing pretty well for the first couple of years, and then kind of ran into some frustrating things in my civilian career and went into a little bit of a spiral. And it was the people around me and both my family and the communities I'm in as far as cycling and veterans that kind of helped pull me out of that spiral. In addition to the community service I started taking part in around 2017 is I think an important part of it is getting out there and really, what I lost sense of is I think a connection with purpose. Is It's easy to have
Mhm.
purpose in the military, right? And I got out and I was focused on paycheck and getting a good job and really didn't have the connection with purpose that I did in the military. And that was a huge realization for me right around 2017 when I started getting involved in a lot of my nonprofit efforts. That they gave me that purpose again and a connection to people that are doing work that I believe in. That really pulled me out of a spiral of kind of this anger and guilt that I'd given into for a number of years that did damage, to me, both just ruminating with myself uh, in a negative way, and also not really relating with my family that well. So that all comes out of the cycling and the service that I've done since getting out of the military.
So now you're spending time with your nonprofit, which helps with some community well-being and coaching kids.
Yep.
Yeah. So connect the dots for me on that. You started your kind of your transition out of your post-military funk into this community well-being advocate. I mean that's not just okay. I used my community to get better myself, but now I want to give back to it. So how did that unfold?
Yeah, I think it started a little bit selfishly, where I was riding my bike a lot, and I saw a need in my community to uh, improve or create trails in my community so people could walk, run, or just exercise, get outside. And so I began to start working on the trails in my community, and that's how I got involved with Green Space Incorporated, eventually becoming the president. Um, and right now we're working on a master plan for our community for bike pedestrian facilities throughout the community to help with well-being. Um, and along the way, I just remember seeing this TED talk talking about how good community service is for your well-being, right? And the funny thing the guy talks about is you have to do at least 200 hours a year for this well-being to kind of take effect for you. But the twist in it is you can't be doing it for the well-being. You just have to be doing it to do it. Um, so that was part of it with green space. The other part of it with the kids, it really started as my love of being a competing mountain biker, a mountain bike racer, and I was very, very focused on the racing. And the more I got knowledgeable on being a youth coach, the more I realized what was really important to these kids is getting outside, feeling some sense of autonomy that they could do things within their control and kind of overcome obstacles because being on a mountain bike can be very intimidating for people. Uh, and watching these kids just the evolution that happens when they build confidence and as they overcome these obstacles that in their minds they don't think they can overcome on a bike, and then finally, this again back to this community. These kids. particularly this younger generation, I think they're dying in a lot of ways for personal connection, not only with peers, but adults other than their parents. And so me as a coach, I really look at myself as sometimes for these kids, I'm the first meaningful adult relationship they have, or my fellow coaches outside of their family, and what kind of confidence that gives a young athlete, and how valuable that is. Um, so anyhow, just this thing has become more focused on creating really young leaders that are confident, and part of it is encouraging community service among them to either advocate for their sport, advocate for trails or anything else they believe in, and giving them the confidence that their voice matters. So it's all been that whole thing has just become the center of my life, is um, improving my community and creating more advocates and more great young people in this community that will hopefully carry on well past my time.
Yeah, there's some powerful things in there, Dave. That the overcoming obstacles and building confidence. I still remember learning to ride a bike. When you're however 3, 4, 5 years old, uh, and you keep falling off, but you have the courage to get back on. And at some point, there's a confidence switch that flips on that says, I know I can do this. And it's usually when you got like one more pedal than you did last time, and you went, oh, I'm getting better.
Yeah,
And then you get two more, and then
yeah,
you get five more. And then you're outrunning your dad, and he lets you fall. But that was autobiographical, I guess. But the other piece is the personal connections with people outside of their family. And I don't think that can be overstated. I think it's incredibly important in terms of building faith with the community. It's when kids believe that their family unit is the only one that's right, or the only one that they can rely on, then they become insular and they become uncomfortable when they're away from that family. But when they have connections with good people outside of that family unit, when they learn to trust a coach, when they learn to trust a teacher, when they learn to trust a community leader, that builds that faith in community that it's okay to be away from my family. There are good people here.
yeah. I agree, and I think I've had this conversation with a lot of my coaches and a lot of the families of the team. Is if you, I would not want to be a teenager these days, for a lot of reasons. And I think part of it is, and it's not just teenagers that struggle with this. I think we look at the social media world, and we could have 2,000 Facebook followers or 2,000 Instagram followers or however many you have, and mistake that for real connection, and it's not. And I think it's one thing. I'm an introvert, and I'm pretty hardcore introvert, so I get peopled out after a while. But I think every person needs real connection, and I think it's getting harder and harder as we get more technologically connected to do that. So you have to, build this ability to put your phone down and get out and get in touch with people, get in touch with the outdoors, and get active. And that's part of, like you talk about, that aha moment or that light bulb moment when you realize you've just broken through a barrier. These kids do it, and you can observe it. You literally can, whether they're on the bike or whether they've made a new friend or something else. Is they just um, suddenly realize they're part of something that matters to them and is making a difference in their life, and it's a powerful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I think as we were chatting earlier, you talked about when you left the military and you went in and you were chasing a paycheck, and there's a reason to do that. I mean, your military pay only goes so far, right? Your retirement pay, so you do need a paycheck. Most of us. But you also said that there is a piece that was missing working in that world, chasing the paycheck, and now I think, as you phrased it, working for purpose. And I think
Yeah,
what you just described is an incredible part of that purpose.
yeah, for sure. I think there's got to be a sense of purpose and a sense of accomplishment, and I think some of my post-military jobs were lacking in that. And I knew it before I left the military because I can remember going to a conference where I was a speaker and, as a warrior transition battalion commander. And I had somebody ask me, what would you tell military veterans as they come into my company? Or how should I be able to talk to them? And I said, you need to be able to talk to them in more than just compensation, in terms of compensation. You need to be talking to veterans in terms of purpose. And I think it fell kind of flat because I'm not real sure civilian leaders understand that all that well. As much as they're used to talking about compensation, benefits, role of their jobs, uh, and I think for veterans, many veterans, if not all, it's important that they know they are part of a big effort, and their efforts are making a difference in that overall effort. You know, so it's important to be talking about that with former military people, I think.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of people that are just going through the motions at work, whereas in the military, you could be the lowest level individual contributor in a squad, but you understand that your platoon has a mission, and if you as an individual contributor do the right things, your squad's going to be successful and make that platoon successful, and that's going to make the company successful. And you can see that, you know what the mission is, and you understand how what you're doing applies to the larger effort. And many
Yeah,
people in the civilian world don't see that as often, and I think they become transactional. I never felt a private was like, hey, I'm just here for the money. If I put in my hours, I'll get a paycheck. I've never heard that from a
mhm.
private in the military, but you hear it in many different kinds of businesses where they don't see the purpose of what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think maybe military leaders have it easier in some respects, being able to speak to purpose. And that's not to say civilian leaders shouldn't try, because at the lowest level of the military, you can tell a member of a squad your purpose is the guy on your right and the gal on your left, or whoever it may be, right? And that's a simple enough way to do it. And how do you transpose that over to a civilian job? Uh, I don't know. So it's one of those things that I think civilian managers, I think it's possible, but it certainly could be a challenge in some jobs.
Yeah, I think it is too. And when as an executive coach, when I talk to leaders about instilling that purpose in their people, you have to start with the leader. The leader has to understand the purpose of the business beyond just making money. Like every business exists to solve a problem. What's that problem that you're solving? Why are you solving it? What makes it worth solving? And then when you can get to be very articulate at those things, then you could start telling your folks, hey, we're solving a problem for people.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you've got a purpose to help solve that problem. And it may not seem like whatever it is, if you happen to be the one emptying the trash cans, that you may not see that what you're doing does solve a problem for somebody, but it does. And you can draw the
Yeah.
lines for them. And
For sure. I guess one of the easiest things is, your purpose might just be making your teammates more effective.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we used to call those combat multipliers, right? If you get
Yeah.
certain functions that make everybody's job more effective, it's incredibly important, and it gives that individual who's doing that, when they recognize that they are making the place better and making other people more effective, that they are serving a purpose. So, but that's just one of the many things that we learned in the military that we try to bring to the private sector. Um, Sometimes we have a difficult time when we leave the service, trying to transition what we learned and how we did things in the military to how we do things in the private sector. Personally, I think one of my first lessons was, sarcasm doesn't sell in the private sector the way it does in the military. And I had to learn to rephrase things that had become common phrases for me that were sarcastic in the military that I just couldn't keep doing. I can't keep saying things like that. Uh, so
Yeah, yeah. For sure. And like we were talking earlier, is, just my upbringing and where I grew up, sarcasm is probably deep in my bones. So in the military, it generally, you're in the home of dark humor and sarcasm. Um, it works most of the time, but not all the time, even in the military. But as you get out in the civilian world, and I learned this more as a coach because I guess I was a little bit insulated. I was always close to military populations until I started becoming a coach. And what I realized is sarcasm doesn't land right with kids and families sometimes, and you have to be very careful. And I think another thing as an Army officer, I think we are kind of we learn over time that we have to be able to make decisions and make quick judgments, right? And I think sometimes we have to learn as we get into the civilian world is we have to reserve those decisions and judgments until the time is right or until we've taken that beat to think about, okay, if I make this judgment or I make this decision right now, doesn't need to be made now, and how is it going to go with my organization or my people? And I think something I struggled with as a military leader getting out is sometimes you have to slow things down a little bit when it comes to making that snap judgment or that quick decision to say, all right, well, let's let this play out a little bit longer. It's not time sensitive, or it doesn't need anything, doesn't need my input right now. Uh, so let your team struggle with it a little bit if you can. And I think that's a development piece, right? Is you know it's not that you're an absentee leader or manager, but there's a purpose behind it. Is that you never know. Maybe your team will come up with something even better than you would have come up with um, if you would wade in quickly. A little bit off the sarcasm comment, but
No, but
I think
I think that's absolutely appropriate. Decision making and decisiveness is considered such a strength in the military, and nobody wants an indecisive leader, but that's not the same thing as making quick decisions,
yeah,
right? It's knowing when is the latest time you must make a decision, and taking as much time as you have or as much time as you need to make a good decision. And I think sometimes we get into this kind of methodology in the military that every decision has to be as quick as possible because we like to be decisive. And in combat, that's probably true in most cases, that you do have to make these rapid decisions. But not everything's an emergency. And the rapid decision making model and the deliberate decision making model are two different things. And sometimes we conflate those. And I think leaders in the civilian world do it to their peril just as much as they do in the military.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think I learned it later in my military career is and translated in the civilian world is, you know, just because you can make a decision doesn't necessarily mean you should. From the standpoint of, is it really a decision that needs to be made at your level? Does the battalion commander need to come off the top rope on this decision, or can it be made by a first sergeant? And I'm a firm believer that you're empowering that subordinate leader when you allow them to make that decision and you trust them and back them up, and that's just good leadership wherever you go, I think.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. I can't tell you how many times I've told people when they would bring me a problem, then they would say, "Okay, can you make a decision on this?" I'm like, "Why am I making that decision? Why is it somebody?" there's there's like a cliche or a metaphor for, we call them bike rack decisions, and it's when you have your entire senior leadership team there in the room, and somebody brings up whether or not we should put the bike rack in the front door or the back door, and we're like, how much does the bike rack cost? And you're like, it's $2,000 for the bike rack. And I'm like, the burn rate for this meeting with all of the highest paid people in the company is sitting right in this room. We burn more than the bike rack is worth making those decisions. Why don't we put that $2,000 decision down at a $2,000 decision maker level? And
Yeah,
we can concentrate on things that will actually move the needle for our company and help us move
yeah,
forward to achieve our vision.
yeah, for sure. I think sometimes leaders, we're our own worst enemies. Is we have to back away and no one get out of the way, right?
Yeah, and sometimes that is incredibly difficult, particularly with leaders that formed the company. If you were a founder and it was your
Hmm.
bright idea on the back of a napkin one night that is now a company, letting go of that is just so difficult. And watching somebody else make decisions on your behalf is incredibly hard for many leaders.
Oh yeah, yeah, and something one of my favorite sayings, and I don't know who I could attribute it to, but leaders make more leaders, and that's great to say. But like you say, when you're a founder or you're somebody that's deeply involved in the well-being of an organization, and I'm going through it now with my team, is it's gotten pretty big, and as the founder. I knew it was coming at some time, but letting go and and knowing you have other people capable of doing the things that you used to do, and being comfortable with that is very, very hard, it's just one of those things that I think it's easy to be a textbook expert in leadership, but then, actually executing it is the hard part, right? And sticking to it. So like we all know the principles, but sometimes we forget because our feelings or our pride or whatever else may be involved, and uh, we got to be good at kind of insulating ourselves from that and accepting how it's going.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to let go because you're so uncomfortable, and senior leaders have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Right? And
yeah,
I remember being in a room with General Mattis once, and he said, you have to delegate to the point where you're uncomfortable, and if you're not uncomfortable, you haven't given away enough.
yeah.
Uh,
I remember a great conversation I had. It was in my master's program. We were talking about leadership and irrelevance. And I think the best leaders work towards irrelevance, right? So their organization can run without them, and that's a very, very uncomfortable thing to pursue, right? And I think the reality is in this conversation, a lot of people are saying, no, you can't work to make yourself irrelevant. And my argument is you should work towards irrelevance because you're enabling your subordinate leaders to become better at what they do, and you're exhibiting trust to them, which I think enhances buy-in, right? And at the same time, I don't think you got to have enough courage to realize and believe that you're never going to be irrelevant, because there's going to be always those outlying questions and problems that are going to need your experience and your ability to kind of work through them, right? So you try and increase that space where your subordinate leaders can do so much in the organization without your input, but have your guidance and your trust. Um, and then that allows you to focus on those areas, whether it's something that's exceptional in the present or to look further out into the future so you can anticipate changes better. So I think that piece of working towards irrelevance serves the organization best.
yeah, so I think that's very countercultural, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's this whole make yourself indispensable, and that way you'll never get laid off, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there are people who are still working in organizations beyond their usefulness because they're the only person who knows how to do X. Like they're the one that processes the TPS reports, and they're the only one who knows how to do that. So we can't get rid of her because who will do that? She
yeah,
hasn't taught anybody to do that. But if you make yourself irrelevant, right? You make yourself. I don't know if irrelevance is exactly the concept that we're after, but it's making yourself maybe irrelevant at the tactical level so that you can
yeah,
go think about strategic things.
yeah,
And that happens. You're able to do that when you put trust in people and you train them, and they work consistent with your vision and your values.
yeah, yeah. Well, and you think we as leaders, we work towards not having single points of failure, right? And
Right.
if we're not working towards making ourselves, you know, if we're not working towards being a strategic leader and we're still down at the tactical level, we're becoming the single point of failure.
That's right. Yeah, I think the single point of failure piece, we call it a bus factor. When we're evaluating companies, we look at it and says, okay, what's the bus factor of that company? And if you have a single person and if you took them out, the company is going to fold, you have a bus factor of one. And you never want to have a company who's got a bus factor of one. And so if you have good processes, good structure, good culture, first of all, that help keep people within the process and the structure, then your leaders can keep a person between them and the problem. That way that they can go long. They can start to see what's next, what's over the next objective, what's the objective after next. And I, huge fan of some of the titans of business, but when somebody congratulated Jeff Bezos on a record quarter a couple of years ago, he says, "What are you talking about? That's not for me. I didn't do that. That's what those guys did. I set that quarter up for success like 3 years ago."
Yeah.
And the team that's leading that is who should be congratulated. I'm 3 years down the road right now, so I'm not really worried about what's happening this quarter. And he has the luxury to do that now. I don't think he had the luxury to do that in the early 2000s, but he certainly does now. And I think it serves as a good example for us to think, can we reach out strategically to think about what's after next if we trust our people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's awesome. So there's lots of stuff that I think that we've learned in the military that is appropriate for the private sector that translates very nicely. And I think there was something else that you mentioned before was we got pretty good at what I think you said you get good at being called stupid and ugly or something like that.
Yeah. Just when I'm searching for hopefully constructive criticism, I tell people, hey, 30 years in the military, I am comfortable with being told I'm stupid and ugly. So, you can't do any worse than that, right?
Yeah, but there's some truth to that. You get a thick skin because people will tell you when you're not meeting a standard.
Yeah.
And you can expect it every time you don't meet the standard that it will be pointed out. And you don't take it personally. It's you against the standard. You know when you didn't make the standard.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think it's hard to hear that criticism, right? And I think it's something that the military generally we're pretty good at doing, right? I mean, I can think about all of the hot washes and AARs I sat through where it was like having skin flayed off you. Um, and I don't know if there's too many experiences in the civilian world like that, where you are just laid bare and you get used to it in the military, but again, it goes back to what you were talking about is you have to take a different tack as a civilian is how can you turn that into something where people get the point of your criticism without completely shutting down.
Yeah. I think that becomes cultural as well, right? Because we're talking about military culture that says if you don't meet a standard, expect to have it pointed out, and often publicly. It's it's not always done with the empathy that we want from our leaders, but it is always done, and you can expect it. So people tend to not get upset about it because they know that that is the culture. I think if you can create a culture where people are honest with each other, not just honest in terms of not lying, but honest in terms of candidness. When your teammate is not meeting the standard, when they're not helping you be your best, and you can point that out. Now that's a really strong corporate culture. And I think it mimics a little bit more what we're used to seeing in the military.
Yeah, and it just the thought that occurs to me is in the military, and experiences differ, but I think there's also a strong culture of mentorship and development too, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
leaders that you've worked for. And I don't know if that could be said in the same manner in the civilian world. It certainly exists, but so you have a leader that will beat you to a bloody pulp, but then next week he will bring you into his office and coach you or mentor you on something that is going to get you further down the road. So I think there's that kind of tough love mentality and my civilian experience, I never had that with with any of my bosses, my civilian bosses, and I just don't think that that piece of the culture is there. So maybe that also contributes to the ability to take criticism. Is there's nothing on the other side that balances that out with that leader, you know, investing in the development of that employee. You know, I'm sure it varies based on companies and everything else and people's individual experiences, but I wonder if that part of the culture is as strong on the civilian side as it is in the military.
I think some companies do it well, and then there's all the others. Um, but I think there's kind of a mentality, I think, with leaders in the military that you don't choose the members of your squad, right? You're even as a senior commander, you don't get to choose all the people that are going to serve on your staff. Those are assigned to you. They come to you. Now, in some cases, when you're pretty high up, you get to select certain ones, certain key players. But for the most part, you get to play the cards that you're dealt. So if you're given, three superstars and two duds, you have to rely on those duds. So you're going to start putting effort into getting those guys up to standard, because that's all you're going to get, because you can't just fire them. And if you do get rid of them, those seats are going to sit empty for a while. And if you can get them, so you're going to invest in those folks that have the potential to meet standards. And I don't know that we see the same kind of culture in the private sector. I think we get, those people can't play at this level. Let's just get rid of them.
Yeah, and I think there's a real emphasis, and again, this is my limited experience on technicians and credentials in the civilian world, right? So you're bringing somebody in that is, theoretically doesn't need or shouldn't need the development. Whereas I think every job in the military, we're kind of used to starting at the bottom, not knowing what the heck we're getting into, and then by the end we're competent, right? Um, and I think, just looking at the hiring process and from what I've seen is how tough it can be to get somebody that is not only competent for the job you want, but somebody that's going to fit into that team, right? And so there's opportunities there to develop and shape people that I don't know how many companies do it well, um, compared to the military. And the military is a mixed bag too. It all is on the leadership.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think there's quite a few parallels. Um, I think all in all, leadership is leadership, and people respond well to good leadership, and they respond poorly to poor leadership. But I think some of the hallmarks of military leadership, which is having a common purpose, right, and taking care of troops, and building a culture, or at least a command climate that is positive in nature, that people can get behind, and holding people to standards. I think those fundamentals that we learned in uniform as people much younger than we are now, are very, very relevant in most of the private sector.
Something that stuck with me, and it's in one of the Army, or it was in one of the Army manuals for leadership, is, a leader's role is to inspire and influence, right? We can't really compel and control as much as we like to think we can, maybe. So, how do we, and I think it goes back to the purpose piece, is, how do we inspire and influence the people that we work with, that, what they're doing has meaning and is making a difference somewhere with somebody. And kind of that's kind of a core of it is, it's not just meeting the numbers. It's, you know, giving people, a place where they are getting something for their lives other than just compensation.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. Working for purpose. I love it. Dave, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming and spending some time with me this afternoon, and sharing your wisdom and your experiences. I love what you're doing with coaching kids. I love how you're building their confidence. You're connecting them with community. I love how you're helping them overcome obstacles and make those personal connections with people outside of their family, to recognize that this is a great community that you live in, and everybody has a part in making it better.
'Em. Yes, sir. Yeah, Bob, it was great catching up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been great. Today's guest has been Dave Haines. Dave, tell people really quickly how they can learn more about your nonprofit where you're at.
Okay, well, you can contact me at david.haines, Haines, at Heartland Cycling Devo, and that's DEVO.org. David Haines at heartlandcyclingdevo.org.
Awesome. Dude, it's been really great catching up, and I very much appreciate you coming on and making us all just a little bit smarter today.
All right, thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.